My days now begin and end in the cramped, dim apartment that Mark calls home, a tiny space squeezed between the noisy streets of New York City and the relentless hum of the city that never sleeps. I never imagined I would find myself here, an unwelcome guest in my own son's world, reduced to shadows and silence amid the cluttered chaos of youth and careless laughter. The walls, once imagined to hold warmth and family, instead close in like a cage, each corner heavy with the weight of unspoken resentment and bitter neglect. That evening still burns bright in my memory, a humiliation so sharp I felt my dignity fracture and splinter. Mark and his friends had gathered in the living room, loud and unfiltered, their voices bouncing off peeling wallpaper and stained furniture. I had quietly taken my seat at the kitchen table, hoping for a simple dinner, a moment's peace in the storm of their careless energy. But instead, Mark burst in, grinning with the reckless cruelty of youth, and placed a shallow dog dish before me. It was plastic, scratched and stained, the kind of bowl meant for a pet, not a mother. Laughter erupted around me, Mark's friends snorting and jeering, their eyes gleaming with amusement at my expense. Mark's smirk was sharp, a blade disguised as a joke. "Here, Mom, dinner's served," he said, voice thick with mockery. I stared at the bowl, the cold, unappetizing food inside, mocking the woman who once fed her family with care and pride. My fingers trembled as I reached out, the humiliation sinking deep, but I forced myself to eat. I swallowed not just the tasteless meal, but the bitter truth that I had become a punchline in my own son's life. The apartment felt smaller than ever after that night. The laughter continued, but it no longer held warmth or connection. It was weaponized, a reminder of my place at the edge of this family. Mark and his friends treated me like a ghost, a bothersome presence to be ignored or ridiculed. I could no longer count on a kind word or a gentle glance. Instead, I was met with sneers and dismissive shrugs when I asked for help or simply sought a moment of human kindness. Isolation wrapped around me like a suffocating shroud. The city outside was alive with possibility, but inside these four walls I was trapped in a cycle of neglect and emotional abuse. I watched Mark from a distance, a man I barely recognized, his youth hardened into cruelty. The son who once held my hand as a child now turned away, indifferent to the woman who had given him life. I felt invisible, a relic cast aside in the relentless forward march of his world. Yet beneath the shame and despair, a flicker of something stronger began to grow. I refused to let this be the end of my story. Each humiliating moment, each cruel joke planted a seed of resolve deep within me. I began to see the cracks in Mark's laughter, the vulnerabilities hidden behind his bravado. I realized that this was not just a personal failing but a symptom of something broken in our family, a fracture that I could no longer ignore. I started to observe quietly, taking mental notes of the patterns of neglect and disdain. The locked doors, the whispered insults, the cold shoulders all became pieces of a puzzle I was determined to solve. I reminded myself of who I once was, a woman of dignity and strength, a teacher who shaped young minds and nurtured hearts. That woman was still inside me, waiting to reclaim her place. The apartment's clutter mirrored the chaos inside my mind. Empty beer cans, discarded clothes, and the remnants of late-night parties filled every corner. Mark and his friends left a trail of noise and mess, careless of the space we shared. I cleaned when I could, folding clothes that were never mine and scrubbing surfaces stained with neglect. But my efforts went unnoticed, swallowed by the apathy that hung heavy in the air. Sleep was elusive. At night, I lay awake, listening to the muffled sounds of the city and the louder, more intrusive noises from the apartment next door. I wondered how I had come to this point, once respected, now reduced to a shadow in my own son's life. The loneliness was profound, but it was also a catalyst. I began to steel myself to prepare for the battle I knew lay ahead. I thought of the stories I had read about elder abuse, about the silent suffering of those trapped in homes that should be havens but become prisons. I recognized my own experience reflected in those narratives, and it gave me a strange comfort. I was not alone. There were others who had faced similar betrayals, who had found ways to fight back and reclaim their lives. I vowed that I would do the same. In the quiet moments, I practiced speaking out loud, rehearsing the words I might need to say. I reminded myself that my voice mattered, that my story was not one to be buried beneath mockery and neglect. The small apartment felt less like a cage and more like the battleground where I would begin to reclaim my dignity. Mark's laughter still echoed through the walls, but it no longer had the power to break me. I was learning to wear silence like armor, to endure the cruelty with a quiet strength that he could not see. I was no longer just a mother in a dog dish. I was a woman awakening to her own resilience, ready to fight for the respect and love I deserved. As I sat by the window one evening watching the city lights flicker against the dark sky, I made a promise to myself. This would not be my final chapter. I would rise from this humiliation piece by piece until I could stand tall once more. And when that day came, Mark and his friends would no longer hold the power to define who I was. For now, I remain here in this cramped apartment filled with laughter that cuts like a knife, but I am no longer silent. My story is beginning, and I am ready to take back my voice. Before the cold walls of this cramped apartment swallowed me whole, my life was painted with colors far warmer and filled with sounds far kinder. I often find myself drifting back to those earlier days when I was a schoolteacher in a small, close-knit town, a place where everyone knew each other's names, where neighbors waved from porches and children's laughter spilled freely into the streets. I remember the smile on my husband's face, Harold, steady and comforting like the gentle hum of a lullaby. Our life was simple but rich with love, respect, and purpose. I taught for over 30 years, guiding generations of children through the labyrinth of learning and life. The classroom was my sanctuary, a place where I blossomed and found meaning. I was welcomed with warmth and admiration, not just by my students but by the community that surrounded me. Every morning, I'd walk the tree-lined streets, greeting familiar faces with a nod or a cheerful good morning. My husband and I owned a modest home filled with memories, family dinners, holiday celebrations, and quiet evenings spent in each other's company. Those days felt endless, wrapped in a comforting routine that made the world seem predictable and safe. Harold was my anchor. His steady presence grounded me when the storms of life threatened to uproot my resolve. Together, we navigated the joys and sorrows of life, building a foundation of trust and love that I believed would carry us through anything. But life has a way of unraveling even the strongest of tapestries. When Harold passed away, the threads of my world began to fray. The grief was a tidal wave that crashed over me, relentless and unforgiving. Suddenly, the walls of our home felt emptier, the silence heavier. The community that once surrounded me seemed distant, as if the loss of my husband had erased my place within it. The steady rhythm of my days was shattered, replaced by a hollow ache that no amount of time could soothe. Financial hardship followed swiftly in the wake of my loss. Harold had been the primary breadwinner, and without his pension and steady income, I found myself struggling to keep up with the mounting bills and the upkeep of our home. The savings we had carefully built over the years dwindled faster than I could manage. I clung to the hope that things would improve, that I could hold onto the independence I had cherished for so long. But reality forced its cold hand on me. The house I had called home for decades became a burden I could no longer bear. The decision to sell was the hardest I ever made, an act of surrender that felt like a betrayal of everything Harold and I had built. Packing up our belongings, sorting through memories preserved in photographs and faded letters, I felt as though I was erasing my past, one box at a time. Moving in with Mark had seemed like the logical choice then. He was my son, after all, and I trusted that he would offer comfort and support in my time of need. I imagined a home filled with the laughter of grandchildren where I could play a nurturing role once more. I envisioned evenings spent sharing stories with Mark and his family, a continuation of the love and connection I had always known. At first, those hopes were not entirely misplaced. Mark welcomed me into his world and I tried to fit into the rhythm of his life. I helped out around the apartment, cooked meals when I could, and cherished the rare moments when Mark's children sought my company. The apartment, though small, held the promise of a new chapter, one where I could rebuild a sense of belonging. But as the days turned into weeks, the cracks began to show. The warmth I had hoped for gave way to something colder, more distant. The respect I once commanded in my community was absent here, replaced by impatience and indifference. Mark's friends came and went, their careless attitudes seeping into the atmosphere like smoke. The space I occupied felt less like home and more like a temporary stop, an inconvenience to be tolerated rather than a mother to be cherished. I looked back on those early days with a bittersweet ache. The contrast between my past and my present was stark, a chasm that seemed impossible to bridge. I remembered the pride I felt when my students succeeded, the gratitude in their eyes, and the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. Now I was invisible, my contributions ignored, my presence a source of irritation. The loss of Harold had taken more than just my partner, it had taken my security, my independence, and the life I had known. The financial strain forced me into a vulnerable position, dependent on the kindness of the very son who now treated me with disdain. I wrestled with feelings of betrayal, confusion, and profound sadness, questioning how a family could unravel so completely. Yet, even in the midst of this painful transition, I clung to memories of the strength I had once embodied. The woman who had stood before a classroom of eager faces, who had faced challenges with grace and determination, still lived within me. That resilience was my anchor as I navigated this new reality, fragile but unbroken. I often found myself recalling Harold's gentle voice, his unwavering belief in my abilities, and the life we had built together. Those memories became a source of comfort and a reminder that I was more than the circumstances that now confined me. They fueled a quiet determination to reclaim my dignity and to find a way back to a life of respect and purpose. The city outside the apartment buzzed with energy and possibility, a stark contrast to the isolation I felt inside. I longed to reconnect with the world I had lost, to find a community that could offer the warmth and acceptance that once filled my days. The journey ahead seemed daunting, but I knew that the past could not define the future. As I lay awake some nights, the echoes of my former life mingled with the harsh realities of the present. I resolved to hold onto the identity I had forged through years of teaching and nurturing. Though the path was uncertain, I would carry the lessons of my past as a beacon, guiding me toward a future where I could once again stand tall. The transition from independence to dependency was painful and humbling, but it also marked the beginning of a new chapter, one that would test my resilience and force me to confront the challenges within my own family. I was no longer just a teacher or a widow. I was a woman determined to reclaim her voice amidst the silence and invisibility that now surrounded me. In the quiet moments between memory and reality, I found a fragile hope. The past had shaped me, but it would not imprison me. I would carry forward the strength I had known, even as I faced the unraveling of my present. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was resolved to walk it with courage, fueled by the love I still held for the family I longed to heal. The fragile hope I had clung to began to wither as the days blurred into a relentless cycle of neglect and cruelty. What started as distant indifference soon morphed into overt emotional abuse, a slow poison seeping into every interaction with Mark and his friends. The apartment, once a tentative refuge, became a battleground where my dignity was under constant siege. Mark's pranks escalated from juvenile jokes to calculated acts meant to humiliate. The dog dish incident was merely the opening salvo. Soon, I found myself the target of relentless taunts, whispered insults that cut deeper than any visible wound. Mark's friends, emboldened by his tacit approval, mocked me behind my back, their laughter echoing through the thin walls as if I were not there at all. One evening, I was locked out of the bathroom, the door deliberately slammed shut just as I approached. I pounded softly, calling Mark's name, but my pleas were met with silence. Hours passed before I was grudgingly allowed in, the cold tile floor beneath me a stark reminder of my exclusion. These moments became routine, small acts of cruelty designed to isolate me, to remind me that I was no longer welcome in what should have been my home. When I mustered the courage to ask for help or a simple kindness, my words were met with dismissive shrugs or outright ridicule. "Can't you see we're busy?" Mark would snap, eyes avoiding mine as if I were a nuisance rather than his mother. The children, once curious and affectionate, mirrored their father's coldness, their smiles fading into wary glances. I became a ghost in their lives, present but unseen. The emotional toll weighed heavily on me, but I refused to crumble beneath it. I began to document the abuse in secret, a quiet rebellion against the erasure of my identity. Each insult, each act of neglect was carefully noted, dates, times, words spoken etched into a journal that became my silent witness. I took photos of the locked bathroom door, the mess left behind after Mark and his friends' wild nights, the empty rooms where I was barred from entering. This documentation was not just for me, it was a lifeline, a way to prove that my suffering was real and deserving of attention. I reminded myself that silence would only serve those who wished to keep me invisible. By recording these moments, I began to reclaim some measure of control, transforming my pain into evidence. One afternoon, I tried to join Mark and his friends in the living room, hoping to share a moment of connection or at least a neutral truce. Instead, I was met with sneers and whispered jokes. They mocked my clothes, my age, my very presence. I felt the sting of their words settle into my bones, but I held my ground, refusing to retreat into silence. Despite the cruelty, I found small pockets of resilience within myself. I learned to navigate the hostile environment with quiet determination, choosing my battles and conserving my strength. I avoided confrontations when possible but kept my eyes and ears open, gathering the pieces of a story I intended to tell. At times, the loneliness was suffocating. I longed for a kind word, a gesture of compassion, but those were rare and fleeting. Instead, I found myself retreating into memories of better days, drawing strength from the woman I once was. Each morning, I reminded myself that I was not defined by the neglect or the ridicule, but by the courage I summoned to endure it. One night, after a particularly harsh day, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the dim light casting long shadows across the room. Mark and his friends had left the apartment in disarray, empty bottles, discarded clothes, and the lingering scent of smoke filling the air. I cleaned silently, my hands steady despite the ache in my heart. This was my world now, but I refused to let it break me. The emotional abuse extended beyond words and actions. It seeped into the very fabric of my days. I was excluded from family conversations, ignored at meals, and left to fend for myself in a home that had once been a place of comfort. The absence of respect was a wound that no bandage could heal. Yet, amidst the despair, a quiet fire burned within me. I began to recognize the patterns of abuse for what they were, a deliberate attempt to diminish me, to erase my worth. I vowed to fight back, not with anger or retaliation, but with evidence and resolve. I would no longer be a passive victim in my own life. The journal I kept became a testament to my strength, a record of survival in the face of cruelty. I wrote not just of the abuses but of the small victories, the moments I stood firm, the times I refused to be silenced. Each entry was a step toward reclaiming my voice and my identity. I also reached out quietly to old friends, sharing fragments of my experience in hushed conversations. Their concern and support were lifelines, reminding me that I was not alone. These connections, though limited, reinforced my determination to seek help and to find a way out of this toxic environment. The emotional abuse was a storm I could neither ignore nor weather alone. I understood that survival required more than endurance, it demanded action. As I documented the cruelty and gathered strength, I began to envision a future where I could break free from the chains of neglect and reclaim the respect I deserved. For now, the apartment remained a place of shadows and silence, but within me, a quiet revolution was underway. I refused to be forgotten, to be diminished by the very people who should have loved and protected me. The journey ahead was uncertain, but I was no longer willing to suffer in silence. As the days wore on, I realized that enduring the abuse in silence was no longer an option. I needed allies, evidence, and a plan. The journal I had been keeping became the cornerstone of my quiet rebellion, but I knew it would not be enough to simply document. I had to find someone who could help me navigate the legal and social maze ahead. In my loneliness and despair, I reached out to Linda, an old friend who worked as a social worker in the city. She had always been a source of strength and wisdom, and I hoped she could offer guidance in this dark chapter of my life. Linda listened with a steady calm as I recounted the daily humiliations, the locked doors, the mocking laughter, and the emotional neglect. At first, I worried she would dismiss my experience as family troubles best left alone, but instead she responded with empathy and urgency. "This is serious," she said quietly, "and you deserve better. We need to take steps to protect you, and I can help." With Linda's encouragement, I began to gather more concrete evidence. I discreetly recorded conversations where Mark and his friends made disparaging remarks about me, using my phone's voice recorder when I could. I took photographs of the locked bathroom door and the cluttered, filthy spaces I was forced to inhabit. I even managed to obtain copies of my bank statements, which revealed unsettling discrepancies, withdrawals and charges that I did not authorize, funds vanishing without explanation. Linda helped me connect with a legal aid organization specializing in elder abuse cases. The staff there were kind but professional, quickly recognizing the signs of financial exploitation layered on top of emotional abuse. They explained the resources available to me: legal counsel, protective orders, and advocacy services. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope, not just that I could escape this situation, but that justice might be on my side. Together with Linda and the legal aid team, I began compiling a dossier of evidence. The journal entries, recordings, photographs, and financial documents were organized meticulously, each piece reinforcing the reality of the abuse I endured. We also uncovered troubling information about Mark's behavior beyond the apartment walls. It appeared he had been subletting the basement to a student named Ava without my knowledge or consent, an arrangement that violated lease agreements and added to the chaos within the home. This revelation deepened my resolve. The apartment was not just a place of personal torment, it had become a hub for deception and disregard for my rights. I realized that Mark's betrayal extended beyond emotional neglect. It was a manipulation of my living space and finances for his own benefit. Linda stood by me through every step, accompanying me to meetings and offering emotional support when the weight of it all felt too heavy. Her presence was a balm to my battered spirit, reminding me that I was not alone in this fight. She encouraged me to speak openly about my experience, helping me find the words to articulate the pain and injustice I had long hidden beneath a veil of silence. The process was exhausting and often terrifying. I feared retaliation from Mark and his friends, the prospect of upheaval, and the uncertainty of the legal battles ahead, but I also knew that staying silent was no longer an option. The abuse had gone on too long, and the cost to my dignity and well-being was too great. One afternoon, Linda and I met with an elder abuse investigator who took my statement with careful attention. She asked detailed questions, not just about the incidents, but about how they made me feel: the isolation, the fear, the erosion of trust. For the first time in a long while, I felt heard in a way that went beyond mere words. I was not just a victim, I was a person reclaiming her story. Meanwhile, I began to reach out tentatively to other friends and acquaintances, sharing my experience in carefully chosen moments. Their responses varied from shock to outrage, but many offered encouragement and connections to resources I had not known existed. These interactions strengthened my resolve and expanded the circle of support around me. As the investigation gained momentum, I noticed subtle changes in the apartment. Mark grew more guarded, his careless laughter replaced by tense silences when I was nearby. The friends who once roamed freely began to avoid the space altogether. I sensed that the walls of my prison were starting to crumble, that the abuse would no longer be hidden beneath a veneer of family normalcy. Still, the fight was far from over. The legal process was slow and fraught with challenges, but I was no longer alone or powerless. With Linda's unwavering support and the backing of advocates who believed in justice for elders, I was beginning to reclaim control over my life. The documentation I had painstakingly gathered was not just evidence, it was a testament to my courage and refusal to be silenced. In moments of quiet reflection, I understood that this chapter was about more than escaping abuse. It was about restoring my identity and asserting my worth. Each phone call made, each meeting attended was a step toward healing and empowerment. The journey was arduous, but I could feel the tides turning, the possibility of a future where I could live with dignity and peace. Though the apartment still held shadows of the past, I was no longer a prisoner within its walls. With allies at my side and a growing sense of strength within me, I was ready to face the battles ahead. This was not just a fight for survival, but a reclamation of the life I deserved, a life marked by respect, safety, and the simple human kindness I had been denied for far too long. Armed with the evidence we had painstakingly gathered, I took a deep breath and stepped into a world I had long feared, the legal system. Filing a formal complaint was both terrifying and liberating. The weight of months of humiliation and neglect suddenly felt like a tangible force propelling me forward, a chance to reclaim what had been stolen from me. The social workers, attorneys, and investigators who now surrounded me formed a protective shield, their belief in justice breathing life into my battered spirit. The restraining order was the first victory. Mark and his friends were ordered to stay away from me, a legal barrier that felt like a lifeline thrown across the chasm of abuse. The court's decision was a formal acknowledgement that what I had endured was real and unacceptable. For the first time in years, I felt the fragile stirrings of safety and respect within my own life. The eviction notices that followed were both a relief and a source of anxiety. Mark was forced to leave the apartment, the place that had been my prison and his playground of cruelty. Watching him pack his belongings, I felt a complex swirl of emotions, anger, sorrow, and a cautious hope for a better future. The space that once echoed with mockery and neglect now held the promise of peace and healing. Regaining control over my finances was another crucial step. The legal aid team uncovered unauthorized withdrawals from my accounts, funds that Mark had siphoned off without my knowledge. Through persistent legal action, those funds were restored and safeguards were put in place to prevent further exploitation. The return of my money was more than financial, it was a powerful symbol of reclaiming my autonomy and dignity. With each legal milestone, I felt the heavy burden of invisibility lift. I was no longer the forgotten mother, silenced and sidelined. I was a woman standing tall, demanding respect and justice. The process was arduous, filled with moments of doubt and fear, but the support system I had built around me became a source of strength. Linda was always there, offering encouragement and reminding me of how far I had come. As Mark and his friends exited my life, the apartment slowly transformed. I began cleaning and organizing the space with renewed energy, reclaiming it not as a battleground but as a sanctuary. The walls that once felt like they were closing in now seemed to breathe with possibility. I set up a small corner by the window where sunlight streamed in, a place where I could sit with my journal and plans for the future. The legal victory was not just about punishment, it was about restoration. I took control of my affairs, managing my finances carefully and setting boundaries that had long been ignored. The experience taught me the importance of vigilance and self-advocacy, lessons I was determined to pass on to others who might find themselves in similar situations. I also began attending support groups for elders who had experienced abuse. Sharing my story with others brought a profound sense of connection and healing. I realized that my journey was part of a larger struggle faced by many, and my voice could be a beacon for those still trapped in silence. The strength I found in community was a balm to the wounds left by betrayal. One afternoon, as I sat with a group of women who shared their own stories of hardship and resilience, I felt a quiet pride. I was no longer defined by the cruelty I had endured, but by the courage it took to confront it. The road to recovery was ongoing, but each step forward was a victory in itself. The transformation extended beyond the physical and legal. Emotionally, I began to rebuild the shattered pieces of my identity. I learned to trust again, to believe in my worth, and to embrace the possibility of happiness. The scars remained, but they became marks of survival rather than shame. Throughout this process, I kept thinking of Harold and the life we had built. I imagined him smiling, proud of the strength I was showing. His memory became a source of comfort and motivation, a reminder that love and resilience endure even in the darkest times. As I moved forward, I also considered the future, what it might hold and how I could shape it. The experience had changed me, deepening my empathy and resolve. I wanted to use my story not just to heal myself, but to help others, to be a voice for those who had been silenced. The apartment, once a place of pain, was slowly becoming a home again. With each cleaned surface and organized drawer, I claimed a bit more of my independence. The light filtering in through the window seemed to carry a promise that the worst was behind me and that new beginnings were possible. Though the journey had been difficult and the scars deep, I was reclaiming my life piece by piece. The legal battles, the emotional struggles, the moments of doubt, they were all part of a story of survival and empowerment. I was no longer a victim, but a woman who had fought back and won. In those quiet moments, sitting by the window and watching the city move beyond my walls, I felt a profound sense of peace. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it felt full of possibility. I was ready to embrace it, armed with the knowledge that I had the strength to overcome even the darkest chapters of my life. With Mark and his friends finally gone, I found myself stepping into a new chapter, a fragile beginning marked by quiet hope and cautious freedom. Thanks to Linda's unwavering support and the social services network that had rallied around me, I was able to move into a small but comfortable apartment nearby. It wasn't grand, but it was mine, a sanctuary where I could breathe without fear or ridicule, a place where I could begin to rebuild both my home and my spirit. The first days were tentative. The silence was unfamiliar, no longer punctuated by taunts or careless laughter. Instead, there was room for reflection, for healing. I spent hours arranging my few belongings, each item a thread reconnecting me to the life I was reclaiming. The window overlooked a small park, and watching children play and neighbors greet each other reminded me of the community I had once been part of. Eager to fill the emptiness with purpose, I began volunteering at a local community center that offered programs for seniors. It was humbling to return to a place of service after enduring so much, but it felt right. I found solace in mentoring others who, like me, had faced hardship and isolation. Sharing my story in those moments was both a release and a balm, a way to transform pain into strength. The center became a refuge, a place where I could connect with people who understood the complexities of aging, loss, and resilience. I met women and men who had survived their own battles, their courage inspiring me to keep moving forward. Together, we formed a tapestry of stories woven with threads of hardship and hope. I learned that healing is rarely a straight path, but one marked by small victories and the support of others. Volunteering also restored a sense of identity that had been stripped away. I was no longer just a victim of abuse, but a mentor, a guide, a beacon for those still struggling in silence. The children's laughter at the center reminded me of my teaching days, and I often found myself sharing lessons not just in academics but in resilience and self-worth. Linda remained a steadfast presence in my life, a friend who celebrated every step I took toward healing. We met regularly for coffee, where we talked about everything from mundane daily happenings to the deeper challenges of recovery. Her encouragement was a steady flame, illuminating the path ahead. Financially, I began to manage my affairs with greater confidence. The legal protections put in place ensured that my resources were safeguarded, allowing me to think beyond mere survival. I enrolled in budgeting workshops and slowly rebuilt my savings. Each deposit was a small victory, a reclaiming of independence that had been threatened for so long. The apartment, though modest, became a symbol of my rebirth. I filled it with plants that thrived under my care, their green leaves a testament to growth and renewal. I painted the walls soft colors, creating a space that welcomed light and warmth. This was my sanctuary now, a place where I could nurture myself as I had once nurtured others. Yet healing was not without its shadows. There were days when the memories of abuse surfaced with a sudden, sharp sting. Nightmares visited me and moments of doubt crept in like unwelcome guests. But I learned to face these shadows with the tools I had gathered, the support of friends, the strength of my own resolve, and the knowledge that I was no longer alone. In those moments, I often returned to my journal, writing not just of pain but of progress. I recorded the smiles shared at the community center, the new friendships forged, and the quiet pride in managing my own life again. This practice grounded me, transforming scattered emotions into a coherent narrative of survival and hope. One afternoon, a young volunteer at the center caught my attention. Ava, a bright-eyed college student, reminded me of the student Mark had sublet the basement to without my consent. But Ava's presence was different. She was kind, attentive, and eager to learn from those around her. We struck up a friendship, and as our bond grew, I found myself mentoring her as much as I mentored others. Ava's own story was one of struggle and resilience, and together we created a space where stories could be shared without judgment. The community center became more than just a place of service. It became a sanctuary for healing and growth, a testament to the power of connection. Through these relationships, I discovered a new purpose. My journey through abuse and recovery had equipped me with empathy and wisdom that I could use to support others. I became an advocate for elder rights within the community, speaking at events and raising awareness about the often hidden scourge of elder abuse. The transformation was profound. Where once I had felt powerless and isolated, I now felt empowered and connected. The scars of my past remained, but they were no longer chains binding me. They were marks of strength, stories of endurance that I carried with quiet pride. As I looked around my modest apartment filled with the warmth of plants and memories, I realized that this phase of my life was not an end but a beginning. The pain of the past had shaped me, but it would not define me. I was building a life rooted in resilience, compassion, and purpose. The community center and the friendships I nurtured there became an extension of my home, a place where I could continue to grow and give back. Each day was a step forward, a chance to transform suffering into strength and silence into a voice that could inspire others. While the journey ahead was still uncertain, I faced it with a newfound courage. The woman who had once been humiliated and neglected was now a mentor and advocate, a living testament to the possibility of healing and renewal. In this chapter of my life, I learned that recovery is not just about surviving but about thriving, about reclaiming joy and connection in the face of adversity. The past was a part of me, but it was no longer the whole story. I was writing a new narrative, one of hope, purpose, and the enduring power of the human spirit. Years later, as I sit by the window of my small apartment, the cities hum a distant backdrop, I find myself reflecting on a journey that began in silence and humiliation but has grown into a testament of resilience and hope. The woman who once endured mockery and neglect within her own family has transformed, not just in circumstance but in spirit. The path from victim to advocate was neither straight nor easy, but it was marked by moments of courage and the unwavering belief that no one deserves to suffer in silence. I think often about the power of speaking out, the moment I chose to document the abuse, to reach for help, and to reclaim my voice. That decision altered the course of my life and, I hope, the lives of others who have faced similar darkness. I have come to understand that silence is not surrender but a strategy that can change when the time is right. Finding one's voice is a profound act of defiance and healing. Sharing my story has become a mission. At community gatherings and support groups, I speak openly about elder abuse, the invisible wounds, and the courage required to confront it. I see in the eyes of others the spark of recognition, those who have endured their own struggles, and those who are just beginning to understand the importance of advocacy and protection. It is humbling and empowering to witness how my experiences can inspire others to stand up and seek justice. Among those touched by my story is a young volunteer named Sarah, whose passion for helping vulnerable seniors has blossomed into a tireless commitment. Watching her grow into an advocate reminds me that the cycle of silence can be broken, that each voice adds strength to a chorus demanding respect and dignity for elders everywhere. Together, we work to raise awareness, educate communities, and support those still trapped in abusive situations. Reflecting on my journey, I see that the pain and betrayal I endured became the soil from which something meaningful could grow. The scars I carry are not just reminders of suffering, but emblems of survival and transformation. Each hardship became a lesson in resilience, each setback a catalyst for growth. I have learned that strength is not the absence of vulnerability, but the courage to face it head-on. The legacy I am building is not one of bitterness but of hope, a testament to the human spirit's capacity to reclaim dignity in the face of adversity. I hold dear the relationships I have forged, the community I have helped nurture, and the knowledge that my story can be a beacon for others. It is a reminder that no one is truly alone when they find the courage to speak their truth. I often think of Harold, my late husband, whose memory has been a source of strength throughout this journey. I imagine him proud of the woman I have become, someone who has taken the darkest moments of her life and turned them into a powerful force for change. His love remains a quiet anchor, reminding me that even in loss there is hope. As I continue to listen, to serve, and to share, I am reminded that healing is ongoing. The journey does not end with justice or recovery, but continues in the daily acts of kindness, connection, and advocacy. Each story shared, each voice raised, adds to a growing movement that refuses to let elder abuse remain hidden in the shadows. Now, when I look in the mirror, I see not just the years etched on my face, but the strength forged through trials. I see a woman who has reclaimed her narrative, who has transformed silence into song. My life is a testament to resilience, and I hope it inspires others to find their own voices, to break free from the chains of neglect, and to embrace the dignity they deserve. This journey has taught me that change is possible, not just for me but for all who suffer in silence. It is a call to action, a reminder that every voice matters, every story counts, and together we can create a world where elders are honored, protected, and cherished. And so, I continue listening, sharing, and standing firm, knowing that the power to transform lives lies within each of us. My story is no longer just mine, it belongs to every soul seeking light in the darkness, every heart yearning for justice, and every voice ready to speak.